Welcome back to another episode of the Canon on the Boomer Bus channel. I'm your host Terry, and today talking about the Legend of Korra. So I ordered it. If you don't have access to it, I believe it's a part of CBS All Access for whatever reason. But I did it on Amazon Prime. You could get a 7-day trial on Nick Hits. And so I got the 7-day trial and binged the 4 seasons that way because I was not about to pay for it. But obviously, huge fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and rewatched that for the 100th time probably. And there was a lot of people, because there's a lot of new fans now since it came to Netflix. And so a lot of people talking about Korra, asking thoughts about Korra. And I was like, honestly, I don't remember a whole lot. Like, I just remember being very disappointed. And that was the only thing I could remember. And there's a few things, but I'm like, bro, I gotta, I want to get my thoughts on it, but let me rewatch it to get my clarity. Because, when you're older, you see things differently. But also sometimes, if you got a bad memory, you just don't remember. And especially if it's something you didn't feel worth remembering. And I didn't feel it was worth remembering. So I rewatched it this time. And so I'm going to go through some of my thoughts. So I'm going to go book by book and then talk about my overall thoughts. So let's start with book 1, Air. I rated each episode and in terms of like F to A+. And so I averaged that out. And this season averaged a B, which was obviously pretty solid. And all the seasons were pretty solid. Nothing was horrible, but overall, I averaged a B. I think most of these episodes got like either a B or B- from me. And I liked it. I liked it for the most part. I think obviously it was, and we'll talk about it in the overall narrative, but it was obviously being a very, very much a mirror to Avatar: The Last Airbender and Aang. So that was kind of evident right away. But the biggest thing that hit me is the evolution of technology. I mean, it was easy to kind of look at Avatar: The Last Airbender, especially early on. It's just kind of, hey, like a Lord of the Rings thing. Hey, it's just set in this time and that's just where it happens. But as you go through that season or through that series, you start to see what the Fire Nation is about, and expansion and conquering and colonizing is not just about, wanting to take over, but it's also about technology. And you see a lot of that happening. And so you start to see that, okay, this is mirroring a little bit more of our reality. And then with Korra, that really cements it, where you see they're in a very different time where it's the industrial age. Now these machines and the metal and all these things that the Fire Nation started, that's more commonplace. Like, it was like, oh my God, we created this blimp thing, or dirigible. And now like everybody has those when we get to Korra, and people are now having cars. And so we're evolving technology. So we're following our real life history. And so that was interesting to me, because it wasn't really clear in The Last Airbender if that's what they were doing. It's just like, okay, this is the story. But with this, you see they're very much intentionally bringing our history into this show. And so I like the way they adapted it, where there was like the radio announcer, even though it got annoying later, but he was doing the recap each episode. But they got radios, they got, they listen to things and news, they got cars now, so there's traffic and streets, and it's just all these things that I wouldn't say I'm a history buff or anything, but people that are fans of history, or at least know history, they can get a little bit of appreciation for this, because they're evolving the Avatar world the same way our world evolved. And so now you're starting to see different things. You got factories where people work and all these different things. So the evolution of technology really changed the way things happen, because it made more of an even playing field, where obviously the people that are early to the technology dominate, and that was the Fire Nation. And then people catch up, and then it becomes more of an even playing field into the next new technology. But on top of that, you had Republic City, which was specifically for different types of benders or nations to live. But you can see that through the travels throughout, the new technology has made access more attainable between the nations. Whereas before, you only had, like, the year before the Avatar, before Aang came back, there was nothing but boats and animals. If you got like creatures, I should say, if you got like a dragon or something, or air bison, you could fly that way. But other than that, it was just boats. And then we see now, we get to this point, there's boats, there's not commercial planes, but there's trains, more efficient trains that connect different places. All these things, just like in real life, this technology started to connect us more. And so what you see happening in Republic City, where all these different benders, is happening slowly on the larger level, where more nations can go places. Like, if you live in Ba Sing Se, it's not a crazy idea to say, hey, I want to go visit Republic City. There's a way that you can do it as a normal person rather than just somebody that's super rich. So as we see technologies connecting the world more, cultures are starting to blend. There's still distinction between the nations, but it's not like it was before. So that to me was one of the biggest standouts about the season. I really enjoyed that part. Now, some of the stuff I wasn't a big fan of. Well, let me just throw this out here. The love triangle. I think most people don't like love triangles. They're rarely ever done well. It's so cliche and it's cheesy, and I hated the love triangle in Korra between Bolin and Mako. It was cringy, to be honest, at some points. It's just like, because we'll talk about what they end up doing with Korra, but originally it's like, okay, this is a female avatar. Obviously, a lot of people are going to be looking for representation in different things. And it's not to say, like, because she's a teenager. I forgot how old, but she's a teenager. So it's not to say that it's not realistic that a teenage girl would swoon over boys or talk about boys and stuff. But you do ride that line of being kind of condescending by having your female avatar do that. And there's certain things, especially with Iki, and I forgot the other one, Janora, like when she's talking about boys with them and whatever, like, it's fun, it's fine, it's girl talk. But then just the deeper the triangle got, it was just so stupid, especially the way it resolves, because Bolin is just an idiot throughout this whole series. And like, it could have been real repercussions and drama, but Bolin's just like, you don't like me, it's okay, we're still friends. And so it was just so pointless. I just didn't like that. The pro bending, that I have a love-hate relationship with that, because obviously there is a precedent set with the Earth Kingdom. They did different like entertainment for earthbending where Toph was at, obviously. And so it's natural that with people, this many people with bending, people want to see who's the best. And so I think they did that entertainment wise back then, gambling. Fire Nation was more Agni Kai, was more like I wouldn't say a ritual, but it was more like a formal thing. And they didn't really spar a lot in the water tribe, and then the air tribe, obviously they wouldn't do that. But it was a precedent set. So when you get this many benders, different types of benders together, I think it's natural that people would want to get some type of entertainment, because not everybody's an avatar, not everybody's a nation leader, not everybody's important. Some people are just regular Joes. And so just like our athletes, I know in America we think about our athletes as so amazing, but really they're just regular people. Without, if the NFL or NBA or none of these things exist, you just be a regular dude out there with some talent. And so with technology where you could do the radio, obviously the arenas, people could always come in person. So you started to create a new entertainment wave. So that was natural. The thing I don't like is we spent so much time there. And like with Korra, it was nice for her to meet Bolin and Mako there, maybe do a match. But as we went on, it was like, why are we still doing this pro bending stuff? and obviously we didn't come back to it. And I get it. It was decent. I mean, like, it was creative. I wouldn't say it was something that I would have created as the pro bending, quote unquote. I would have probably did something a little more free flowing because it had a lot of rules. But either way, it was a good creative idea. But they use this, and we'll talk about politics later, but they use this in the show where at one point they're like, well, why are you not going after Amon, but you doing the pro bending finals? And it's like, it's true. She's the avatar. Like it or not, you're the avatar. How are you doing what's essentially a sport when you could be out here working to save people? And it's just like, it made no sense. And it just made an unnecessary, like, problem inside of the story. And I appreciate that she used pro bending to learn a new style of bending, like a modern style of bending that's not so traditional or martial arts. It was more quick, it was more nimble. I like that idea, but we just spent too much time with pro bending, in my personal opinion. Like the different teams, and it was creative and it was fun. Like you had the old heads that were the former champs. You had a bunch of different. I like that. It's just like it didn't fit with what the story was because there was so much more important stuff going on. So that's how I felt about pro bending. But to go back kind of to the evolution of technology and everything, one thing I really liked about this season, because obviously it's about Amon and the Equalists, is that it evolved the storyline where Avatar: The Last Airbender was about inner bender conflict. It was like between the benders, who's the best nation? Obviously, the air nomads were wiped out. The Fire Nation were like dominating people, and they never really said this, to be honest, but it's kind of assumed that they thought Fire Nation was the superior, or fire bending was the superior bending. And so it was really a fight between all the benders. And then this evolved with Korra from an inner bender conflict to bender versus non-bender. And I like that idea. It's a little weird because you just never had a hint of it in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Because obviously it was years ago, but the last thing we saw was a lot of people living together and never having an issue with bender versus non-bender. It was never an issue. Now, obviously they were in a war and all this stuff, but it was never really an issue for them to live together in their own nations. So it was a little jarring to have us jump to Korra, where there's this non-bender movement where we're being subjugated or we're being oppressed. And we never saw that. I mean, not even in the Fire Nation. I mean, obviously, Ozai's family all had strong bending, but you know, the queen, his Zuko's mom wasn't a bender. The two twins, who were they? Were they Ozai's like aunties or whatever? I don't know, but they weren't benders. So it's just like people in the royal family aren't benders. There's a bunch of people that aren't benders. You know, Ty Lee, Mei Ling, they weren't benders. And so it was just like you had a coexistence in all these areas. Nobody was just like benders over non-benders. It was more like earth versus fire versus water. And so it was just weird to jump to this thing because we'd never seen benders subjugate anybody. Like, it wasn't like Harry Potter where the Fire Nation was like, as I mentioned earlier, the Fire Nation was like, Fire Nation is the best bending. Or we never even seen like a pure blood stance where it was like you only breed with benders. Benders breed with benders. You never saw that. Like I said, Zuko's mom was a non-bender. Like, that was never a part of the fight. And so it was a little weird to get to this season and just have non-benders be like, we're being oppressed. And you could say one thing if all the leaders of the council were benders, and so we don't have representation, but they didn't really say that. So it was never really a reason. Like, obviously you could start propaganda and hype people up, but there was never really an inciting incident to show us that non-benders had an issue with benders. Besides the fact that the gangsters, like the triads, the triple threats and all that they were all benders. Besides that, you know, the police were benders too, and the lawmakers were benders. So it just didn't feel like there was a reason for non-benders to be in conflict. Now, if they would have made somebody pushing for bender supremacy and say the natural order is non-benders to be subjugated by us, that would be different. Obviously, that would hit a little closer to real life circumstances, but I think that would have made the most sense as far as the story we got. And so, I don't know, that's just how I kind of feel about it. As much as I like this idea of evolving this, because naturally it would become that. Like, naturally you would have some benders thinking they're better. You have non-benders feeling like they're powerless, similar to how we saw Sokka feel throughout the time with Team Avatar. And it happened with Korra too. I forgot. With Bumi, who was Aang's son. So it's natural. But I just feel like they didn't set it up in a way that gave non-benders a reason to be mad. So there's that. And then a couple things, like, at the end, they never explained Amon's ability to take away bending. We knew it was some sort of blood bending, but obviously they set it up where his brother was the other guy. And it was like, well, if he can blood bend your bending away, wouldn't you be able to unblood bend it? Because you both can blood bend. Like, he's stronger, but I don't know. But either way, they never explained it. You know what I mean? They never explained like how he used blood bending to take it away. And so that was, and in my mind, I must have filled in the blanks because I thought they did. I thought they said like he did something to a certain part of the mind, but it just, that wouldn't even make sense because it's not from the mind. As we saw with Korra's ability to take away bending, it has nothing to do with mind. It has to do with energy and, you know, some more spiritual stuff that you can't really control unless you're the avatar. So it, to me, should have been a temporary thing or something that you could fight through as like a mental block. But the way they did it in the season, it was just permanent unless Korra gave it back to you. So it didn't make any sense. And so that leads to the other point. Korra, when she connected to the spirits, it was so anticlimactic. Like, she was just sitting there. Oh, I'm crying. And all of a sudden, Aang shows up and now she's connected and she knows how to get people bending back. It was just rushed at the end. I didn't like that part. So overall, book one was just, it introduced a lot. Obviously, it had a lot of groundwork to do. And I really liked a lot of the ideas. The execution wasn't the best in a lot of places, but I like the aesthetic. I like this secluded avatar with a fiery spirit being in the big city, learning how politics and business works and all these different, I love all that. But yeah, just some of the execution wasn't great. Book two, Spirits. This got a B- overall, which I'm shocked because I thought it'd be a C. But this was the lowest rated of the books for me. And really, like I said, I thought it'd be lower. I just did not like this. I did not like this book at all. Let's just get to it. The spirit stuff was way overdone. Way overdone. It was so confusing and it was just contradictory to what happened in the season. And it contradicts a lot of stuff that happened in Avatar: The Last Airbender. I just felt like they went too much detail because whenever you do magic and all these different fantasy elements, you want to be specific. They always talk about I forgot what it's called, but setting up these rules of magic. You want to be specific in how the rules work and whatever. And if you don't have the details to how something works, you want to be vague. And I think Avatar: The Last Airbender did a good job with just being very vague about the spirit world and how things work. And they do that in Korra, but they also try to add way too much detail. So it was just like in Avatar Last Airbender, it was just like, well, what is the lion turtle? Wait, how come the spirit do that? Well, how come the spirits are in the physical world as fish? Wait, how did it take over the Avatar? You know, it's just like the spirit is mysterious. And in Korra, they say the spirit world is mysterious, but then they also tell you, well, the first Avatar is this, and this happened, and this. And it was just like, you adding so much detail that now is ways to find holes in it. And it was just so annoying. And so that was the biggest thing about it. And there was just so many questions I had. Like, when you start going to details, just opens up so many questions. Like, to me, again, why did the spirit owl, I forgot his name, but the giant owl that's in the library, why did he help Unalaq? He was like, Unalaq is a friend to the spirits. And then in season 3, you had spirits talking about Unalaq manipulated spirits into doing his bidding. Or no, that was season 4. It was like he manipulated spirits into doing his bidding, turning them dark and turning them into weapons. You're trying to do the same thing. So if the spirits felt that way, why is it that the giant owl's the only one like, oh, he's helping us? Like, I know the owl didn't like humans and all that, but you knew Unalaq was trying to release the dark spirit. And you knew he was trying to create darkness. You knew he was turning spirits dark to fight. Like, why did he ever help him? That made no sense. To me, that was just a way to do a callback. On top of that, why did people know about these spirits? Like, I understand Korra finding out, but like everybody was like, Brava, what was it? Rava. It was Rava. And I forgot the other one, but they were like, what? Who are these people? They're the dark and light? Like, what? It's just like, when we saw the original Avatar, he went to the place where the lion turtle, where the the Airbenders were. And so they knew. They was like, oh, Rava, how you doing? They knew exactly who the spirits were. Why wasn't that passed down? We never heard Aang talk about that. And remember, Aang was a master before he went into the ice. We never heard Aang talk about that. We never heard anybody talk. We heard Iroh. You didn't hear Tenzin, who's the son of Aang, who would have been taught that. Like, you didn't hear anybody talk about these very important spiritual ideas. We never heard about any of it. And so it makes no sense, like, when you show the nomads and them living that way and seeing things and knowing these things, and the only one that figured it out was Unalaq. Like, I guess with the library, maybe they're trying to say that he figured out most of this stuff that was in the library that most humans don't know. But how'd he find out about the library? How'd he get there? Like, obviously he had to have some spiritual training, and it makes no sense to me that only in the water tribe they would have this spiritual training. Obviously Zaire got it somewhere, and we'll get to that. But on top of that, it'd be one thing if there was no airbenders. You had Tenzin, who was a master and who was given everything from Aang. And so, in my opinion, he has to know more. They should know more. They're the spiritual gurus. They're the nomads. They're the monks. How do they not know any of this? How do they not know that Unalaq is in the spirit world tampering things? How does Aang as an avatar not know to protect the poles and everything? Now, well, no, I can't even say that. I was going to say she doesn't have connection with them, but she had connection with them. Korra had connection with the avatars at this point. So how could she not talk to any avatar and none of them know about any of this? It didn't make any sense to me. And then lastly, why don't the Southern Water Tribe have an army? They were overran so many times by the Fire Nation. Then they joined the fight. They were in the 100-Year War. Katara and Sokka are from there. Plus the next Avatar was from there. Like, bro, they don't have no army. They don't have no protection. They just let the Northern Tribe roll in. Didn't make any sense. I didn't like that. So, yeah, moving on. Korra Book 3 change got a B+ overall, which was the highest by a small margin, but it was the highest, which is interesting. The biggest thing I'll say about this is that book 3 was ruined by book 2. This is something we've talked about in superhero movies a lot, where if you go so big, it's hard to go backwards because now things just seem insignificant and then you get inconsistencies. So book 2, in my opinion, which I didn't like, but if you were going to do it, it should have been the last book or at least the third book because it was so big. Like, you're talking about 10,000 years of darkness versus 10,000 years of light. Also, that didn't make any sense. Don't let me get into that, but that didn't make any sense either because 10,000 years of light with no, I forgot the other dark spirit's name, but yet all this bad stuff is happening. She said, dark still comes through the light, but it's just like, well, what does it look like in 10,000 years of darkness then? Like, because this was not great. But anyway, so that's huge. You're talking about the spirit of light, which pretty much created everything about the Avatar, versus the spirit of darkness. And it's just this epic clash. Like, in this world, this is the essential good versus evil. And then you go from that to some benders, a group of benders called the Red Lotus. And they were so overhyped, bro. Like, Zaire, okay, couple things. So Zaire was one of the leaders, and they were talking about how dangerous they were. Then they said, oh, Zaire's an airbender now. Now, that means he won the bender before. What was he so good at that made him so dangerous before he was a bender? I would like to know that, number one. Number two, when you had them together, they were like, oh, each of them could devastate blah, blah, blah country. But together they could take down a whole world. And then they didn't do much. Like, they got to Zafu and they had to put up a real big fight. They had to put up a big fight at Ba Sensei. They put up a big fight at the Air Temple. Like, bro, they were formidable to a certain extent, but it wasn't crazy. And like, Combustion Man wasn't even that great. Like, they made her a little more stronger, but to do another combustion bender, it wasn't like, that's not that formidable. Lava bending, we never saw that. That was formidable. The lady with the water in the arms, whatever. Like, that didn't mean anything. And then Zaire was just OP. But still, together, they were super overhyped. Like, they were just like, they could take down the whole world. We don't know what can happen with the Red Lotus. These 4 are the most dangerous criminals ever. And they weren't that big of a problem. They weren't even around a lot of the season. So, they were overhyped. But with that being said, Zaire being able to airbend the way he did made 0 sense. I get they try to throw in there that he read the teachings of the monks and he studied the air nomads and he was spiritual and all that good stuff. That's fine. But as we said, for a while, bending is martial arts. At the end of the day, in this world, it's martial arts. And obviously, he must have been a great fighter. But you don't know how to airbend. Like, the one thing I appreciate is that when he went up against Tencent head for head, he couldn't handle it. Because that would have really pissed me off. So that they at least had to jump Tencent for that. But still, going up against the Avatar, going up against other people, it was just like, bro, he is way too good at airbending for somebody who has never airbended. Like, it takes practice and stuff. To me, it would be very hard for somebody to practice the advanced or the intermediate, advanced, and super advanced moves when you can't actually airbend. So you don't even know if your form is right because you don't know how to airbend. You don't know how to glide. You don't know how to ride around on the air bubble. Like, you could imagine, you could look at the movements, but that doesn't mean you know that you're doing it right. And so to me, it just takes way too much training and discipline to be as good as he was with airbending. And I get they wanted him to be formidable, but they just kind of forced that in there. I didn't like that. Yeah, so that's really it. Like, I thought the episodes were really good, but they were just solid. Like, the last few episodes, the fighting was so good that it got A's, and that pushed us up to a B+. But for the most season, it was just a B. Because, like, it was solid. It was good. It pushed, like, to me, to tell you, I look at, do you push the plot forward? Do you introduce new elements, like cool new elements to the lore or the world? And is the fighting great? Those really the three things. And I think, like, this season had some of the best fighting, and that really helped a lot of it. And it didn't really push the story far at all, because at the end of the day, they wanted to get rid of world leaders. They wanted to kill Korra too, but they wanted to get rid of world leaders and, like, have chaos, kind of like the Joker or whatever, which didn't really make a ton of sense, but whatever. It was just like, okay. To me, this would be a perfect season 2. But since it was coming off the heels of this huge battle of good and evil, it's just like, whatever. And then, on top of that, it made Korra just super inconsistent. It's like, Korra, you lost the avatar state. You lost the connection to the avatars and all this other stuff. And you fought the spirit of darkness and evil. You know what I mean? You kept the portals open. You did some serious stuff. And then you turn around in this season and you can't fight a brand new bender and some other high level benders. It didn't make any sense. So I think it should have been season 2. All right, so last, season 4, book 4, Balance, ended up with a solid B. Now, this has some good action. This some good action. It just was good action. Everything else, I don't know. Because at the end of the day, oh, I forgot. Let me back up real quick. With book 3, with Change, them choosing airbending to come back into the world was a weird choice to me. Because out of everybody you could have picked, it changes so differently. Because with, like, earthbending, firebending, waterbending, whatever, it's just like, okay, you're a bender. But with airbending, it's nomads. It's the air nomad. It's the monks. The lifestyle they have is so different from everybody that this idea they went around to go recruit. And I get it. They made it a comedy bit part where it was like they were trying to recruit people to be airbenders. It just didn't make it just narratively, it was weird, because who's just going to up and leave and do that? Like, I think they did a good illustration with the first guys. Like, you want me to just leave my family and all this? And they're like, you just got to detach yourself from the world. It's like, no, I'm not doing that. But it's just like, you knew it would be difficult. Why put it in the story? Because it's so difficult that it makes no sense to me that anybody joined. I don't think anybody would have done that. You know, being a nomad and a monk, that's a certain type of person. Like, just because you got airbending one day, I don't think most people are just going to give up their lives and go do it. So I just thought that was a weird choice. Anyway, so bouncing to book 4, Balance. I liked what they ended up doing with the airbenders, as far as kind of being this almost superhero task force. And I like that. They were kind of like police. They were extensions of the Avatar, which is still sad because it's genocide at the end of the day. But it's a new way to reinvent the air nomads, because they aren't going to be what they were. You know what I mean? People aren't all going to be bald monks living vegan lives and all that. I think it was a good transition to what airbenders could be, as far as in this modern time. So I like the way they did that. They had the suits and all that. Tenzin was kind of their leader and, like, putting them out on missions. And that makes sense to me more. Like, telling somebody, hey, come meditate, be a vegan, and learn to airbend, but be a monk. That's not going to move nobody. But to say, hey, you want purpose in life, you want to be kind of an enforcement of good and be alongside the Avatar, like, I think more people would gravitate towards that. So I like the way they end up doing that. But really overall, the conflict revolved around Kuvira. And the thing with that for me is like, how did no one know she was gaining that much power? Because she didn't just go out and do it herself. She was given the blessing by the world leaders to be the temporary leader and to go out and do stuff. How did nobody, and I wouldn't even say nobody, because obviously once she took over, a bunch of people was like, we know what you do to these places. Well, then why didn't y'all stop her early on? As soon as y'all knew she was strong arming people into signing up, y'all should have took her out then. And so that was a little bit of a weak writing where it was just like, oh, wow, she gave him the whole freaking empire and we didn't know about it. Like, they should have knew about that. But overall, I mean, it was a solid season. I can't knock it. I don't think the villain was that great with Kuvira. The threat level, the real threat of this season was Korra having to fight her own inner demons. But at the end of the day, I don't think Korra learned any lessons. That's one of the disappointing parts about this book. She didn't really learn anything. Like, what did she learn? I know she talked about suffering and everything, but she was just not... She was never that great. Like, her looking at all the losses she took and, you know, carrying the poison or whatever as an excuse. Like, that was a good, because, like, you look at it and you're like, yeah, she took L's. She got her bending taken away by a mind, lost to him. Unalak released the dark spirit, and all he was a water bender. And I'll get to that later. And she took an L to him, even though she ended up winning. It was still an L. Because she lost her connection to all the spirits. And then you got Zaire, who poisoned her, almost killed her. She took an L because the airbenders had to save her. And then with Kuvira, she took an L in front of everybody. So she just be taking L's, and it's just like, what did she learn? She still was as stubborn, as hard-headed. Like, she still wasn't effective. Like, I don't know, man. To me, at the end of the day, it was just kind of, it is what it is. Like, I don't really know that a lot was accomplished in this book for Korra. I think they wrapped up the Beifong stuff. They started to wrap up what the air nomads were going to do. They, I don't know if they really wrapped up Mako and Bolin, but kinda. It really was a side story thing for the rest of the world. Like, Korra herself, I just don't feel like she learned anything. So that was disappointing. All right, so overall, Korra, what is this series called? The Legend of Korra. What do I think about it? Some of the big cons, some of the big things I took away. And a lot of these kind of irked me. The dodge bending was OP. It was so overpowered. What I mean by that is in Avatar The Last Airbender, the only person... So when they fought, when benders fought, more times than not, it was your ability to go through somebody. So if somebody threw a rock at you and you're a firebender, it was your ability to bend really, ferociously and blow that rock apart. Or to create a long, ring of fire where they can't, the earthbender can't stand still to throw rocks at you. Or, different creative ways. It was your ability to put your bending through their bending. Whether it was lightning or whatever. Or if it was water bending, they threw rocks, you could freeze it. Or if you put up an ice wall, your ability to throw a rock hard enough to break the ice. Like, it was everything about going through people as benders. Even firebenders versus firebenders. Whose fire was stronger. Like, all of it, when you watch it. Obviously, Aang would avoid a lot of things and get around it. But even still, a lot of times his air currents were strong enough to go through somebody's fire. Or to avert somebody's rocks. That's what bending was. That's what fighting was. The only person that could just completely flip away from bending was Ty Lee. She was really the only one that just completely dodged your bending. Because everybody else, if you were a non-bender, it wasn't really a fight. Like, even if you were a swordsman or whatever, you could dodge a little bit, but for the most part, you were going to get caught because they could throw rocks at you, or they could bring the ground up from under your feet. You know, with water, they could whip things, they could throw darts, or they could freeze you. Like, it's too many ways for benders to get you if you're a non-bender. You couldn't just freaking dodge it, jump out of the way all the time, run here, run there, jump, jump, jump. The only person that really could do that was Ty Lee. And we talked about Ty Lee with her ability to cheat block and the dodge stuff. She was super OP sometimes. And she was the great counter to the benders. That was her job. In this show, they did that for too many people. Too many people were able just to sidestep a air current, or to sidestep a blast of fire, or to duck, or to flip over something. It was like, bro, that's not realistic. That is not realistic at all. And so what it did was, especially season 1, when you're talking about people that don't bend, it allowed people that don't bend to be formidable against benders, and it evened the playing field. And I didn't like that. Like, the idea of cheat blocking and teaching people that, I don't like that it's not just a one person thing, but at least that makes sense. But this idea that you could just flip over everything, that's BS. But it happens with benders too. So you had a lot of bender on bender fights where the bender wasn't as strong, but they knew how to dodge. And it's just like, that's weak. And so for me, I'm just like, it was a point where it should have been just like your ability to be creative. Obviously, you could do different things with your bending to catch somebody off guard, or you're forced to go through a bender. This idea that you could just dodge stuff, it was too much in this season or in this series to me. And to that same point, special bending wasn't special no more. And I don't like it because it was inconsistent. And this was kind of, I'll get to that in a minute, but it was inconsistent where, like for lightning, for example, lightning bending was definitely a technique that somebody created. But even Iroh, who, he created redirecting bending or lightning. But Iroh was one of, the best, and he tried to teach Zuko. Zuko couldn't do it. Zuko's a royal family. He couldn't do it. And so he couldn't shoot lightning. And so it was obvious that it was only powerful benders that could do that. Now, the way they treated it in Korra, they made it seem like it was just evolution. Like the rich people knew how to lightning bend because they had access to that. And now, as we got further into the world, more and more common people know how to lightning bend. They had a whole freaking factory of people lightning bending just in a factory. When back then, only the royal family were like the only ones lightning bending because they were so powerful. I don't even think John, who was part of the White Lotus, was lightning bending. So I think they missed the ball on that because the special bending was about a rare ability in people. It wasn't about this idea of access to education. And that's the way they treated it, where it was like, oh, well, okay, now we're in a point where technology has advanced. Most people know how to learn how to do these things. And they did the same thing with metal bending. Because even Toph said, I had a academy where I taught metal benders. And they had this underground academy where they were teaching chi blocking. And they made it a ideal of education. But that's not really what it was. I mean, even if you go to Bolin, being able to lava bend, no one taught him to do that. He learned that in the moment because he has that rare ability. Now, it's coincidental that we only saw one person doing it, and then Bolin, out of all people, just knows how to do it. But still, it was about a rare ability. The same thing with Zaire being able to fly. Now that is part just education, but that's part of ability, your ability to let go and be able to get to that point of enlightenment. And so early on they established it is a point of rare ability, these different forms of bending, lightning bending, vine and sand bending, being able to lava bend, being able to fly, all these different things. But in this series, they just kind of made it too commonplace. Like, I like the idea of the metal city. I don't like the idea of the metal police where everybody knows how to metal bend, but it was just like metal bending just kind of became whatever. And Toph was so special because she could do that. But she was the greatest bender we saw in that series, and only she could do that. So do I think naturally there will become a time where just there's hundreds of people that can do it? I don't know. I just don't think that's right. And I don't think that there's a bunch of people that should be able to lightning bend. I don't think that, after Korra's done, there's a bunch of people that can lava bend. I know there's a point of evolution, but again, the way they attacked it was technology spreaded information. And that's how more people knew how to do it. But in the first series, it was never about information and education. It was just about rare power. And so we talk about this with Star Wars and a bunch of other stuff, like just having rare power because you come from a powerful family, or just rare power being random. Just kind of like the about the Avatar thing. Like, it wasn't Fire Lord Sozin that was the Avatar. It was, his friend who was random, whoever. And Korra ended up being the niece of the northern tribe leader, but Aang was just a nobody. Like, it should, in my mind, just be a random rare ability for strong benders. And the same thing with blood bending. Like, this idea that there was a guy that could blood bend without a full moon. Okay, cool. But then both his sons were able to do it and he just taught it to them. I think they switched from the first season where it was about power, and the second season was just about education. And I don't really agree with that, because that kind of made stuff a lot more cheap. And then losing the connection to all the past avatars, they didn't resolve that. I hated that. That's purely a subjective choice, obviously, but I hated that. I get how it ended up happening in the second season, but to just have Korra never fix that kills the lore. And I know we're going in a little bit of a different direction with the live action series, so I hope that they just steer away from that if they ever get the Korra. But I hate that. Like, part of the cool thing about the Avatar is being able to tap into all these past avatars, and that was such a rich part of the lore, and they completely got rid of it to no point. Like, she could still go into the Avatar state, but it was just no point in her losing it. And I skipped a part. Bending was inconsistent this whole series, especially the Avatar state. I will say, even in the last Airbender, I thought this. I'm like, how come when they go into the Avatar state and they do things, like, not to say as strongly as they do it, but the way they bend was always different and creative. Why don't they ever learn from that? So when they're not in the Avatar state, they could at least try it. Like I said, it might not be as strong, but at least you could use bending in that type of way. And that was real bad with Korra, because she fought totally different in the Avatar state. And they showed it, like, she's a ferocious fighter. She learned different types of bending. But when she went to the Avatar state, it was different. And it's like, learn how to use it that way. And, like, not just her, but everybody's bending was inconsistent. It was super inconsistent. As I said, you had Korra, who from as a child knew how to do 3 different bendings. The first season, obviously, it took her a while to learn airbending. But she was a prodigy, and she's the Avatar. She's got the Avatar state. Yet, she would get beat by people with 1 bending. 2 people with water bending. one person that was just the airbender, and then one person that was just the earthbender / metal bender. And she would get worked by them. Like, it was almost like she was just good at everything and not great at anything. Not even her water bending, and she's from the water tribe. It made no sense. Like, Aang had to learn bending of all different types. But at the end of the day, if he wanted to airbend, he was going to be the best at it. Obviously, nobody else was airbending. But he was obviously a monster at it. He was better than anybody that we seen afterwards. And so I feel like Korra should have been strong at something. And it was just so inconsistent. When she would do something one time, it would completely knock somebody out, defeat them. But when she would do it against somebody else a different time, it wouldn't work. It was just... And Avatar: The Last Airbender suffered from this a little bit too. The bending is just... It's... You know, sometimes the rock can block the fire. Sometimes the fire blows the rock up. It's just like... I get it depends on who it is. But sometimes it'd be the same two people and it just don't go right. And I don't know. It's inconsistent. And then it was a little bit of greatest hits with this series. A little bit of greatest hits. Not too bad. They try to interweave some things, but it was definitely some greatest hits. And it was certain things I felt like they did not have to do that. Some things felt a little shoehorned in. Zuko barely was there, and that was fine for me. But then they made Toph like a huge part. And it was like, Toph is popular. Let's push her into the 4th season. Like, that was a little bit too much for me. Going back to the library was kind of... It was a nod, but like I said, it created a logic problem in that story. And it's just a couple things that to me was like, they didn't need to do it. Alright, so overall, what you got with Korra is this theme of power. Shown through the evolution of politics. At the end of the day, Korra makes me super sad for the world in real life, because it does show you like people are going to be terrible. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, everybody thought like the Fire Nation was this big issue, or sorry, they thought Sozin was this big issue, and then a lot of people thought Ozai was this big issue, and then they were like, well, it's the Fire Nation that's this big issue, and it's like, well, it's technology that's this big issue. It's all the people. It's people. No matter where it is, Republic City, all these different benders still get together to do crime. Kuvira, wanting to save her country, still becoming a dictator. Elected a president instead of a council, and he's still the person that's being political and fighting with the Avatar. It didn't matter. To me, there was this theme of power in every single season. You had Amon trying to mask the power of the disenfranchised, seemingly just to take over the city that cast his dad out, while his brother is doing the same thing, using political power. Then you had Zaire trying to fight power, trying to take away power from the individuals and give it to the people, and the power of the Avatar. Then you had, I skipped one. You had Unalaq trying to gain power for himself to show that he's better than his brother, and trying to use the dark power and the power of the spirits to fight the Avatar. And then lastly, you had Kuvira, as I mentioned as well. And to me, it reminds me of Civil War, Captain America Civil War, when, what's his name? Vision, he was talking. And he was like, our very power incites challenge. And that's how I feel with the Avatar. It was like every time the Avatar comes in with their power, people feel powerless and they want to challenge her. And so you saw that a lot, this theme of power. And even with Korra, she was like, I'm the Avatar. Ever since she's a little kid, I'm the Avatar. You got to deal with it. I'm the toughest. I'm the roughest. I got the power. I'm the Avatar. And so it was all this idea of power. And then what you saw versus Avatar: The Last Airbender, where Aang had a lack of family. He had a genocide of his people. He had to find family in unlikely places, and he had to find a new semblance of what it meant for family. And that was what the whole series was about. Whereas Korra was about having lots of family. Everything was family. I mean, you talk about what's his name? Amon and his brother. Two brothers ended up being the two main villains who were trying to do stuff because of their dad. Then you talk about season 2 with Unalaq trying to prove that he's better than his brother. And inner conflict that happens when Korra's pulled between family, and who does she support, and how do you be objective when your parents are involved. Then you talk about season 3, where we introduce the Metal City, and we start going more into Toph and what her parents, or it's not her parents, but what Toph left as a legacy as a parent, and how that has hurt all of them, and what Aang left as a legacy to Tenzin, and his pressure to live up to his dad and to create and recreate this airbending society and everything, and even with his kids, like trying to trust them and not be overprotective. And then you get obviously part 4 where Kuvira is an orphan and she's into the Beifong and family. And then you got the king who is descendant of the queen and like his birthright to rule. And you got all types of stuff with family throughout this series. Even Bolin and Mako, everything is about family. I mean, Asumi and her dad. You got everything really tying back to, okay, here's why it's so bad for Aang not to have family. That lost a connection. But then with Korra, we show how that ties of connection can really be a negative thing. Like, obviously there's good to it, but there's some negative to it as well. And then lastly, you had Avatar: The Last Airbender, as I mentioned before, vague on the spiritual content. It was minimal because Aang was a monk. He was a nomad. He was tapped into the spirits. He knew how to meditate very easily. He knew how to do all those things. And as a result, we didn't get into a lot of details because Aang, we just assume like, yes, Aang knows how to do that as the Avatar, but also because he's the air nomad and he knows how to be spiritual. And so we didn't ask a lot of questions, and I think that helped the series. And then you go into this mirror series where Korra's the opposite. She does not have any spiritual connection. And so now we got to get more into overt content about the spirit world and being spiritual. And you have to show her journey into learning how to connect. And as I mentioned before in season 2, I think that was a backfire. But overall, it is a mirror to Avatar: The Last Airbender. You had Aang, who was a young kid who didn't want to be the Avatar and ran away from responsibility. And he had this strong connection to spirituality, but he lost all of his people. Then he was non-confrontational, very evasive and looking for another way. And he had to learn that his issues came when he didn't know how to be fierce or decisive. Then you got Korra, who was very embracing from the very first time that she wants to be the Avatar. And she has no problem being forceful. She has no problem showing strength. But she doesn't know how to empathize and to evade. She just wants to attack. She has no spiritual connection. She is very much rooted in the world. And so she had to learn how to connect to her Avatar spirit and everything else. And so it was very much a mirror to what... It was very much a mirror to what Avatar: The Last Airbender was. And I think there's some good there. There's definitely some good. Like I said, the evolution of politics. And I liked a lot of that. But yeah, there's some things that are missing. And actually, I forgot to talk about that. The evolution of politics was amazing. That's the part I really loved about this show. It mirrors the world in a lot of ways. And I like grounded stuff. I like grounded material. And I don't like things that's super fantasy. And so this idea that now they got cameras and they got microphones and radios and all this more access. More people want to know about the Airbender or about the Avatar. And on top of that, as they evolve how they run their country and stuff, and more people have a say, you know, there's less kings and more democracy, people are going to make the Avatar political figure. And we saw that in every single season, and I loved it. That was probably why season 1 was my favorite, even though it didn't rate out as the highest. It was my favorite because it was the most political. And it really showed how every move you do can be looked at and spent a different way. And it's very reminiscent to what's happening now and what happened in our country, in our world, as we evolve through the years, where you're in a position of power. You don't just get to run around being the Avatar and do whatever you want, even though it's the Avatar's job. The Avatar's job is to be above the kings, above the laws, above the nation. It's supposed to protect the world. And it was harder for Korra to do that because now she's going through something Avatar. I mean, you had a little bit of that with Aang. They had to travel around and see how different people felt about the Avatar. But with this, you know, you got approval ratings. You got much more easy consumption. And you can only think about an Avatar in 2020. And so it was really grounded with the evolution of politics. Like, honestly, I said if I was teaching either a high school or entry-level college course on political science, I would use this show, both series, as a teaching tool. Like, I would assign like 2 to 3 episodes before each class and then talk about the politics within those episodes, because this is a really good mirror to real life politics and how it happens, whether it's a dictatorship, whether it's Republic City going to a democracy, you know, whether it's a nomad place where it's more, you know, free flowing. Like, a lot of different things I think really touch in real life. So the evolution of politics was also a strong theme in this thing, and I really think it was one of the positives. So overall, nowhere near as good as Avatar: The Last Airbender. Not at all. I don't think it was as, I think it's creative but not as creative, and that's bound to happen because you're working off a world that you already had, so you got to throw a lot of similar things in there. But even still, I just don't think the writing was as sharp. I don't think the writing was as sharp. I think it was funnier than I remembered. Like, I was worried like it wouldn't be funny, but it had some funny moments, but it wasn't as funny. They made Bolin stupid instead of like Sokka goofy. Sokka's goofy, but he can be effective. Bolin it's like he was either really beastie or really stupid, and I didn't like the way they did that. Other than that, you didn't get a lot of comedy from a lot of people, but it was some comedy in there. I appreciated that. It's just a notch above Avatar: The Last Airbender, which I would give probably an A, and I would probably give this a B overall as a series. So that's how I feel about it. Anyway, so we broke that thing down. Go to the comment section. Let me know what you think about The Legend of Korra. Tell me what you think about the seasons, what you think about overall. Share it around, get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for listening. And if you heard it, here's the official canon.